here's a few quotes from the Prime Minister. You'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy. Yeah. Or how about, we took on debt so Canadians wouldn't have to. When will the Prime Minister admit that it is not his debt, it is taxpayers' money?
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. It's back to question period where, what a surprise, Trudeau is actually attending for the second day in a row.
Let's take a look.
Today's accelerating inflation rate proves that after 8 years, this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. After he and his ministers pumped their fists in the air and declared victory over inflation, it has now gone up 43% in 2 months. Through all categories, it's higher than here in Canada than it is in the United States and Japan. And worse, it may force the Bank of Canada to raise interest rates again, causing Canadian households who are the most indebted in the G7 to go bankrupt. Will he balance the budget to bring down inflation and rates before that nightmare unfolds?
So again, Pierre is talking directly to the camera, not to the speaker, not to Trudeau. So apparently those tactics that he was using yesterday, he's going to continue until he sees a reason not to use them. And don't be too scared, be concerned, but don't be too scared by the fact that he's saying that inflation went up 43%. He means 43% for the month of July to the month of August, okay? The inflation rate is not 43%, it just increased by 43%.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Over the past year, we've demonstrated that we were able to bring down inflation from the highs of 8.1%, while at the same time being there to invest in Canadians.
Okay, we're not going to subject you to a long Justin Trudeau speech. We're just going to comment on the hypocrisy and the outright lunacy of them saying, well, we brought down inflation, yet it went up. So it's credit to them when it comes down, but it's not their fault when it goes up.
Well, and can you hear the Conservatives heckling in the background?
Yeah, they're just laughing at the ridiculousness of these answers.
The opposition is saying is he wouldn't have been there to help 11 million Canadians with the grocery rebate. He wouldn't have been there to help Canadians with dental care for kids whose families can't send them to the dentist. He certainly wouldn't have been there to cut childcare fees in half right across the country on the way to $10 a day. Those are measures, Mr. Speaker, that have helped Canadians while maintaining fiscal responsibility and seeing inflation.
Well, Trudeau, Canadians wouldn't need a grocery rebate if inflation caused by your government was not driving the cost of food sky high.
They also wouldn't need a grocery rebate, which is just the GST rebate on steroids, if you hadn't driven inflation up in the first place by shelling out $600 billion. And for you to say, oh, Conservatives are saying they wouldn't have been there. They wouldn't have had to be there, because guess what they also wouldn't have done? They wouldn't have locked down the entire country and prevented everyone from going to work.
And this dental benefit that they keep bragging about, if you go to the Government of Canada website, it says, depending on your adjusted family net income, a tax-free payment of $260, $390, or $650 is available for each eligible child. You can apply for a maximum of 2 payments per child. I mean, I went to the dentist and had a cleaning with x-rays, and that was over $800. So even at the best, a $650 rebate, yeah, it helps, but it's not going to get done everything that you need done.
No. And guess what? If these kids have a lot of cavities, they're not even going to be able to complete the cleaning in the first place. And then they're going to say it's going to cost you $2,000 to do the cavities. And then these families are back to square one.
You know, I don't want to besmirch it because it helps, but it's not like this great, amazing thing that the Liberals and NDP are making it out to be.
Doubling the debt on Canadians is not fiscal responsibility, and forcing Canadians to live in tents is not compassion, Mr. Speaker.
Bingo.
There's nothing to say about that. It's bang on. Like, that's it. Full stop.
Yeah, this is what they're dealing with. They're trying to talk common sense on one side of the aisle, and it's fantasy land on the other.
It's the reality. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, life is miserable, especially for the poorest among us. And his solution is to make everything cost even more. Inflation is now accelerating. He hasn't brought it down. He stacked 4% inflation on top of the previous 8% inflation, which means that Canadians can't eat, heat, or house themselves. Will he reverse his disastrous policy so Canadians can pay their bills?
Honorable Prime Minister.
While the leader of the opposition continues to talk down Canadians and talk down the Canadian economy and say that everything is broken, we're getting to work helping Canadians through this difficult time. We're eliminating GST on construction of new apartment buildings to make sure that people can get rents, and we're encouraging all provinces to do the same. A number of provinces have stepped up, which is going to make housing more accessible for millions of Canadians.
Full stop. Did you see that little smirk that he has as he's talking? It's like this arrogant, he knows that the statement he made about Pierre Poilievre talking down Canadians is incorrect. And you can hear the Conservatives jeering. And he's got this smirk on his face. He thinks it's a game.
Well, he also thinks he's really smart because the only reason they announced the GST rebate on these apartment buildings last week is because he knew that they were getting absolutely shellacked in the polls, and he knew that Pierre was going to come at him in question period right when they came back to the House. So he had to have something to be able to say, well, we've done this, and it's recent. So that's the only reason. And it was an absolutely ridiculous initiative. So all this does is basically gives money to the people that are purchasing the apartments. It gives them a GST rebate. That's it. That's all it does. That 74 million in London, that's what happens.
Because normally, at least here in Ontario, if you buy a property and you're not living in it, you have to pay the full HST, so 13% on that new build. You don't have to pay it if it's an older build, and I don't think you have to pay it if you move into the house. But if you're buying the property to be a landlord, you do have to pay that 13% HST.
If you were not the primary resident of that dwelling, and you're using it as income, you have to pay the full GST. That is absolutely correct. So, great. You're giving money to rich people. Fantastic.
One of the ways that this Prime Minister doubled housing costs was by flooding the economy with $600 billion of newly created cash, which bid up the price of homes, forced Canadians to overpay, and then many bought at rock bottom low rates because he promised that they would never go up. His inflationary deficits pushed them up, and now 1/5 of all Canadians are actually unable to pay the interest on their mortgages. Their mortgages are growing in size. When they renew, it will be at a bigger principal at a higher rate. Yep. How many Canadians will go bankrupt, and will we have a mortgage crisis when that happens? Yes or no?
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes.
This is a very real possibility.
And it's not just PR using fear tactics. The Commission is putting out the numbers. That there's all of these Canadians, especially the ones that have variable rate mortgages, because Trudeau said, oh, we're taking on the debt so you don't have to.
Interest rates are at historic lows, Glenn.
So, yeah, all these Canadians that bought houses when interest rates were low, now they're in a lot of trouble because they can't afford their house. And if interest rates go up even more, it's going to be a disaster. So I'm not even going to bother showing you Trudeau's response, but let's get to one of our favorite up-and-coming Conservatives, Michelle Ferreri.
Mr. Speaker, we've heard repeatedly from this Prime Minister that the cost of living is not a priority and Canadians are feeling the consequences. Here's a few quotes from the Prime Minister. You'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy. Yep. Or how about we took on debt so Canadians wouldn't have to? When will the Prime Minister admit that it is not his debt. It is taxpayers' money. And more importantly, when will he start caring about monetary policy so Canadians can afford to live?
I love Michelle.
She's a firecracker.
I love Michelle.
She's amazing. Sorry.
She has this like just really intimidating resting face that you don't want to get in an argument with her. She is like the protective mom of the conservative side. That's the way I kind of view her. And I love that she's speaking what all Canadians are thinking of, because when they talk about this money that they're throwing around, they talk about it as if it's their money to play with, and it's not. It's our money. It's taxpayer money. We're taxed to the nines.
And what do we get for it?
We get a heck of a lot less for paying a heck of a lot more. And they want to tax us even more. I still don't understand how Liberal voters say, yeah, I support Justin Trudeau.
Because they're supporting an ideology. Like they're supporting, fantasy, what could happen, instead of saying, look what is actually happening, and I don't want to be part of that anymore.
So, good on Michelle for continuing to call this stuff out, because it absolutely needs to.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I find it fascinating the Conservatives' newfound interest in making life more affordable for Canadians. What's funny, Mr. Speaker, is she doesn't realize that many of her colleagues voted against the Canada Child Benefit, which puts more money in the pockets of 9 out of 10 Canadian families and stops sending child care checks to millionaires. They oppose increases to old age security for seniors when they turn 75. They oppose increases to the Canada Student Loan and Canada Student Grant programs, and they oppose increases to the Canada Workers Benefit. You can't be fooled, Mr. Speaker. Their record in government was lower wages, higher unemployment. We've turned the ship around. We will be there to support Canadians in their time of need.
You are actually sitting there with a straight face saying, we've turned the ship around.
And all these things that he's listing off, I mean,
they cost money.
Yeah, they cost money to other taxpayers. Every time, as a citizen, you get something from the government, you are taking it away from the people around you. That's how it works. Like, as sad as that is to say, that's exactly how it works.
Well, and why were the Conservatives voting against all of that? Because you were using Band-Aids instead of actually looking to resolve the problem at the root cause. And the root cause is you're spending too much money. So the Conservatives were trying to say, stop spending all this money and you won't have to give Canadians the childcare benefit, which spends more money, which causes more problems in the first place.
Well, and that's exactly it. The way you should be running a government is similar to the way you should be running your household, in that you don't want to get into debt over frivolous things. If I were to run out and buy a boat right now, we'd have to put it on credit. Is that a good financial decision? No, absolutely not. If I hit the lottery and we got all this money all of a sudden, and then I wanted to buy a boat, would that be a good financial decision? Yeah, probably, because now I have all this money. It's the same thing with the government. You don't want to go into a deficit because then your citizens pay the price.
This is the equivalent to what the Liberals are doing, okay? It's like they don't have any money, so they go and get a credit card. Okay, so then they buy groceries on that credit card. Fine, and they max out that credit card. Oh, what do? Let's go get another credit card. And then we'll pay off the original credit card with that second credit card. That's what they're doing here. And what does it do? It puts you further and further and further into debt because you have to borrow and borrow and borrow more money and pay more and more and more interest.
And who's the one paying the interest? Canadians.